Hi everyone, welcome to week 4. We are working on our paper progress assignment for this week, which is a little bit of a shift from where we've been. We've been working on the database assignment, which is when you collect all of this evidence for your central question. And then we're now shifting gears to actually start thinking about how we're going to write this paper, how we're going to put things together. So the first thing that you need to know is we're going to pause on all of the database assignment. That is just going to be saved. We're going to come back to it later, but it's important that you started with that database material first, but I don't want you to worry about it for this week. Instead, this week we're going to go back to that central question and we're going to start developing more questions, sort of smaller questions that will help us answer this bigger question. On my screen here, you're going to see that I've come up with a similar question to one of those that you all may have asked, and that's good. The whole idea here is that I want to show you what it looks like for this assignment so that you'll know how to go about completing it for yourself. And what we're going to do is we're going to think about this bigger question and we're going to try to answer we're ultimately going to try to answer it by asking all the smaller questions that will help us chip away at this bigger question. The answer to the bigger question is going to be our thesis, but we don't have it yet because we still have to dig through all of the smaller pieces. So to give you a sort of a corollary example, if your bigger question was, where should I go to college? There's so many smaller questions you need to ask to get that bigger answer. So for instance, you'll need to ask, what about the school's location? What about the cost? What about the availability? What about the hours? What about the reputation? What about the time it would take me to complete? What about any million other factors? For me, it really mattered when I was going to get my master's. I wanted to go to a state school and I wanted it to have a football team, which is probably not the best way to choose a college, but all the same, I ended up at Florida State as a result. But it also mattered which school would pay for my school, which school would had a low enough cost of living that I could afford to live in that city. So even though I got into more expensive areas, I didn't want to go to a school that was going to be so expensive that I couldn't really live there. So with this one, we're going to think about our stories and we're going to think about our bigger question and start asking the smaller questions to dig into it. The question I have here for you, you'll notice, is that it's a two-parter. It's one of those ampersand questions where we're pairing two different themes. Here we're pairing the idea of gender and place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a Word document and put that question at the very top. That's my central question. Then I like to do this as bullet points, specifically because if you do it as bullet points, you keep in mind the idea that these are smaller questions that build to the bigger one, so they kind of set it aside visually for you to remember that you're looking at these smaller questions. What we're going to do is we're going to brainstorm as many small questions as we can that will help us get at the answer for this bigger question. So for example, does masculinity affect the story? If you ask the question about masculinity, what's the natural second question? Those of you watching this are probably thinking femininity. So great, so now we have our second one. So what you're seeing here is I'm just popping out questions. Now what you'll probably notice is right now I've only dealt with gender. So what's the next there you go. You're welcome. That's a little goof for you. What's the next logical question that will be born of this bigger question? Naturally, we're going to think about place. So then we'll think about, how does place change throughout the story? So these may prove useful, they may not prove useful. The idea here is at the end of this process, I want to have at least 20 questions that might help me answer this bigger question. Think about it a little bit like if you are a prosecuting attorney. If you ask all the questions, you want to know what's the timeline, who did it, what would be the motive, what would be the alibi, what would be, where did it happen, when did it happen, all of these bigger questions. You may not be able to answer, for example, you may not be able to answer the timeline question. There may be some gray areas. You don't know, but that's okay because you may not answer all of the questions, but you still get a good enough picture to push that case forward. Same works for the defense. All of these are all the same processes. And what we want to do is have so many good questions that we can pick only the best ones with the best evidence. And then we can afford to lose a few. In some respects, writing a really good paper is a little bit like making cookies with a cookie cutter. That if I gave you just enough dough to make 12 great cookies and they had to be perfect, then that puts a lot of pressure on you. But if I gave you so much dough that you could throw away a bunch of cookies or you could map them out perfectly and cut out that perfect cookie, that's going to really make a difference for you in the quality and the stress level. So what we're trying to do with this database assignment and this, which we'll call it sort of the question battery or the question bank. With the question bank, the idea here is you want to know that when you start writing the paper, all you have to do is answer as many questions as you can and move from one logical question to the next. So if you think about that sort of elusive term flow, right, we've all heard papers have to flow, but if I told you to make your paper flow, chances are really strong you wouldn't know what to actually do. That's what this is going to solve for you, because if you think about this spot here, if you write a paragraph that says masculinity affects the story in this way, then you pull some evidence from your database, then you start talking a little more about it. The next logical question for your reader will be, well, what about femininity? Well, because you banked all your questions so nicely here, it's setting you up for that sense of flow where logically you're moving from the one logical topic to the next. Same holds true with indoors and outdoors. Ask as many questions as you can, and keep in mind that these are repeated processes for people in other papers. So if you're still taking classes here at Mercer, you can repeat this process. When I start working on a chapter, I'm asking all the same questions of my comedians. So I'm asking, how do they use the set? What are they dressed like? What's their tone of voice? How do they interact with the audience? What kind of topics show up again and again? These are all the same questions. So getting into that process of asking good questions and learning to ask good questions in the service of answering the big question will serve you very, very well, not just here, but all throughout your life, even if you're not taking any more classes at Mercer, because you'll know to look at things from as many different angles as possible. So that's basically it. Your assignment for this week is to come up with 20 great supporting questions. You can by all means go beyond 20 questions, but 20 should be sufficient to get you to that 6-page mark that we're looking for in this paper. If you have questions about this, by all means reach out to me. Happy to speak with you. And if you get stuck, feel free to ask for help with this. Ask your friends. If you were reading a paper answering this question, what kind of questions would you ask? The key here is if you have 20 good questions and you know how to get 20 good questions, you're going to be in great shape. Writing is often a communal activity. I'm not saying you should write your paper with somebody because that's cheating, but to bank questions and build up this, that's totally acceptable. So for this assignment, if you get stuck, ask people for help and ask them to contribute some questions. That'll be a really useful part of this process. And I think you're going to find this to be a really efficient way to write a paper that makes you feel confident in what you're putting out there. Again, if you have questions, reach out. Otherwise, I will see you all on Monday. Thanks.